For those who, I've got a Google Drive if you want the slides, the notes, all the stuff that we've been doing. You can go there. You need to have a Gmail email. Yeah, that sounds funny. And yeah, I will, once you send through the link, then I will, once this is over, I will hook you up. You should, everyone from last week should be there. If you can't see it, then come speak to me. I may have missed you. All right. Who's been enjoying it? We're in week 9. Can you believe it? We're halfway through March. I don't understand what's happening to the year, but nonetheless. All right, so I am going to be using Bible Project.
If you pick up the Bible, you don't have to read far
as a catch-up
before you meet the main character, God.
Yeah, he appears in the Bible's first sentence.
And
then later on page 1, you meet the humans.
And there you have it. The 2 main players in the Bible, God and humans on the stage of our world.
Sorry,
well, not
Joel,
quite.
press stop.
In the Bible, there's actually...
I don't know why it's not playing. Ignore me.
a way bigger cast of characters than just humans and God.
Like who?
I mean the figures called the Elohim in the Hebrew scriptures. Angels, the Satan, demons, they're all over the story.
Oh, right. Spiritual beings. To be honest, I've never really known what to do with them. It's all kind of weird.
And unfortunately, almost all of our modern conceptions about these beings are based on serious misunderstandings.
All right, so let's talk about spiritual beings in the story of the Bible.
So first thing we have to do is reorient ourselves to how the ancient biblical authors saw the world. On pages 1 and 2 of Genesis, God brings order to a watery wilderness, separating the skies above from the land below.
Right, this is Earth, where we live. And then there's the heavens high above, which they saw as God's domain.
But in the Bible, these spaces are not separate. They overlap. And in fact, the Garden of Eden is described throughout the Bible as a high mountain garden where heaven and earth are one.
Cool.
So that's the world. Now it needs some creatures. God first creates and appoints the sun, moon, and stars to rule the day and night.
You mean the giant flaming gas balls in the sky?
Well, that's how you think about them. But the biblical authors, like all ancient people, saw them as heavenly creatures that are glorious, shining bright, and high above.
Which is strange. I don't think of stars as creatures.
Well, you don't. But for the biblical authors, the stars formed their categories for thinking and talking about a spiritual reality that exists alongside ours. And it's a different kind of reality, just like the sky is different from the land. And it's populated with creatures that have different kinds of bodies, shiny spiritual bodies.
Okay, so almost all ancient cultures thought of the stars as divine beings, including the ancient Israelites.
But the biblical authors make clear that these beings are not God. Rather, they're images of God. Their glory and high status is a reflection of the Creator's glory and status, and they exist to serve His purposes.
So the stars symbolize beings who are like God's heavenly staff team.
Right. Now let's go back, because after God appointed the heavenly host, He also appointed another type of creature.
The humans.
Yeah, in Hebrew they're called Adam, which sounds like the Hebrew word for dirt because that's what they're made of.
So glorious rulers above and hairy sapiens below.
But then comes the great twist. God tells the lowly humans that they are to rule all of creation. He invites them to rise above their dirty origins and share in God's glory as His partners.
So God wants to rule the world through humans and not the spiritual beings.
Exactly. This is how the poet of Psalm 8 understood the stories of Genesis. He looked up at the stars and says,
"What is humanity that you consider him? You made him lower than the spiritual beings, but crowned him with glory and divine majesty."
This is humanity's high calling, to rule creation in the love and power of God.
Very cool.
But not everyone's happy. We're introduced to a spiritual being who doesn't want humans to rule, so he tricks them into thinking that they can get divine power on their own terms.
They're deceived and they take the opportunity.
So they're banished from the Eden mountain, exiled to wander the earth and return to the dust.
This snake is bad news.
Yeah, and as you read on, you discover that he's part of a spiritual rebellion that follows the humans outside of Eden, and things get worse from here.
The humans still desire to rule, so they start a new project.
Yes, in the Bible, this is called Babylon. It's the anti-Eden, where human and spiritual rebels join together to elevate themselves back to their former glory. And right, so with all that in mind, we can now appreciate the full cast of characters that we meet in the biblical story.
God, humans, and all of the spiritual beings.
Exactly.
Pretty cool, huh? If I could have done it in 5 minutes, I should have. Hey, we took 8 weeks. Okay, so the last 3 weeks, just to recap a little bit for you guys, is we looked at the lineage of the serpent, the Nakash, and the seed of what that meant for us, the increasing spread of sin, the rapid spread of depravity among humanity, and then how those rebellions, the 3 rebellions that we looked at, how that devastated our world. So wonderful. We can pretty much apply that. And series finished? No. So the question maybe some of you have been asking is, we haven't heard much about Jesus. He's kind of been mentioned. How does he fit into all of this? And we've kind of implied and sort of said, Jesus has done a lot. We know that he died on the cross, but how does he fit into all of that stuff that we were looking at? Well, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. So, are you ready for this? Because now we're going to start getting into Jesus. So, right, everyone, get ready. We're going to go to the New Testament. No, I'm just kidding. We're still in the Old Testament. Guess what? We've got some amazing, I feel like a Very Mark ad, but like on steroids here. Because, guys, there's so much more. All right, so in order to kind of go forward, we have to go a little bit backwards. And Peter had this picture of like these many layers. And I had a picture similar to Peter, but it wasn't making a cake. It was kind of when you start a painting. So when you start a painting, you've got to block out your picture first. And it looks a little bit, you would say, dull, hey? And it's quite hard to see the image and like what the picture is because there's no detail. So right now what we've done is we've blocked our painting out. Now we're going to start adding the detail. We're going to start contrasting, highlighting, but a lot of this is going to be Jesus. Isn't that cool? All right, so what if I was to say to you that we're going to unpack Jesus in the Old Testament? We're going to unpack him. So he doesn't just appear. So we kind of divide the Bible up into the Old Testament, New Testament, and kind of New Testament is where we see Jesus enter into the picture, where we see the gospel kind of starting to apply. I don't know about you, but that's how I used to think. Maybe I'm the only one. You're all looking at me a bit oddly, but I think that's kind of how we picture it. But actually, it's so much more. All right, so going backwards, before the flood, remember there were no nations. You'll understand why I'm unpacking this. It was just God and humanity. There were no different tribes, no different nations. There were no boundaries in terms of nationalities, ethnic groups, races. It was just God and humanity. There was also no official priesthood. They did do sacrifices, but there was no official Levite priesthood as well. So we saw in Deuteronomy 32, what God did was he set boundaries. And he created, in those boundaries, he created these different nations. Then the result of different languages came into being and all those kind of things came into being. But what he did was he had handed the administrative rulership over to lesser gods, these other spiritual beings. Their rulership became corrupt. And that's when all the problems in Babel started to kind of emerge. And because of the Babel incident, God was unwilling to fulfill the mandate of Eden with the world looking like it did. It was basically a wreck, and God wasn't wanting that to carry on. So he had to make a plan. So what was his plan? You see, the problem is when we humans get to tweak what God has set in place, and we try to run things our way, and we think we know better, guys, it ends in disaster every single time. If you think that you can change God's way Just go back and read the Bible. There's story after story after story after story of where we humans and the Elohim, where we think we know better, we know a different way. God's way is always best. And it's best for us, not for him. So, when you think you know it all, just go and ask God. So there were some pretty clever people. Gary asked me how did they figure this out, and they kind of map it out technically, but from the moment of from the flood, where the flood receded, to the incident where they started building the Tower of Babel, was only 100 years. That's not a lot of time for like a big mess. Okay, so that, again, proof. If we try and do things our way, we make a mess. 100 years, when they went from 7 people who had the knowledge, worshiped God, to 100 years later, worshiping other gods, exalting themselves and trying to make a name for themselves. Only 100 years. I think we're literally seeing what's happening now. We've had so much change in the world. It's similar. We really, really, really do need help. So we have to remember the disinheritance in Genesis 10 was never a permanent solution. God never intended humanity to be separated, to have different languages, and to be not one family. That was never, ever, ever God's intention. It wasn't his permanent solution. So God again, it's like what we say to your kids, okay, I'll just tell you one more time, God again, okay, let's try this again. He's going to do it. He's going to start again. And this time he goes to a guy called Abraham. So he is chosen, like we saw last week. He wants a new nation. So he goes, other nations, you go to these other gods, lesser gods. They're supposed to elevate God in worship, but they elevate themselves. So they fail in their assignment. And God wants to initiate and start a new nation. Deuteronomy 32 says he calls it his portion, his people, his nation. And he's going to do it again through a man. But now he's got this guy, Abram. Original Abraham is Abram. So now he's got this guy. But now there's an issue that I don't think we kind of appreciate. So problem is, so God is the kind of God, it's not like Babel, where he goes, you guys come to me, you come and worship me. He's initiating and he's coming to humanity. But now he knows there's an issue. And the issue is he's got to initiate a meeting, because this is the kind of God we serve. He's not like high in the sky kind of God. He's a face-to-face God. And he needs to initiate a meeting with this guy called Abram. But as I said, he runs into a problem. So this is Yahweh. We have to appreciate, and I really want to sit. This is Yahweh. There is literally no other spiritual being. There's no other being, human or spiritual, that is like him. He is uncreated. He is holy. He is pure and undefiled. No, in other words, no defilement or anything impure can come into his presence. So the problem now is that if he comes to this guy called Abram, guess he's going to die. Because Abraham he's not defiled in the sense of there's something wrong with him. It's just that he isn't who God is. And he needs this. Remember, there's no priesthood. There's no way for Abraham to go through any kind of ritualistic purity ritual to become to a place where he can even just go near God's presence. It's like kind of like the sun. So the sun gives us light. It provides warmth. It's really good for us as a planet, right? Who has been in space and near the sun and live to tell the tale. The closer you get to the proximity of the sun, we as humans disintegrate. We can't. It's the same with God. So God's like, I need to make a way. And I never really kind of thought about this in it this way, and it's amazing to think about it that God, for God's portion, for God's nation to take root, he has to initiate this meeting, and he wants to do this. It's his desire, it's his heart. So think about Eden. We're like, well, it happened in Eden, but there was conditions in Eden that helped humanity to be immortal. They were to feed off the tree of life. That was their sustenance, so they could survive and be in Eden, which is a place, a sacred space, where heaven and earth intersect, and that's how they could stay there. The moment they chose for themselves their way, eating the tree of knowledge, God had to remove them because they would then, it's not good for them, humanity. Do you see how where I'm tracking with this? So we need certain conditions to be able to be in God's presence. So God's amazing. What he does is he blunts his own light and glory in a way and helps Abraham process God as a human. What are you saying, Louise? Well, let's dig into the word and figure it out. Okay, so where did Abraham come from? Here's a guy who was living in Mesopotamia. He was a pagan. It doesn't say he was a good guy, it just says he lived there. It didn't say anything, but he lived in Mesopotamia. He must have done what the culture did in those days. His roots go back, so his genealogy, his heritage goes back to Noah's son Shem. Shem is a nice name. And God first contacts Abram in Mesopotamia. In Acts, actually, what's interesting is Acts gives you the clue here of what happened. So let's go to Acts. The glory of God appeared to our father Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. And then obviously this is God speaking to Abraham. He says, leave your country and your people. We all kind of know the story. God said, and go to the land I will show you. So he left the land of the Chaldeans, those guys, and settled in Haran. So now what's interesting is God hasn't yet told him where he's going to end up going, but he leaves. He's on his way. He's going somewhere, but he doesn't know where he's going. The language here is interesting. So now you've got to start like turning on your curious eyes and asking yourself, why are they using this type of language? God of glory appeared to our father Abraham. So many of us have experience with sort of the spiritual world, so we're thinking maybe it's through a dream. Maybe you had a dream about God. That's pretty valid. Let's see what else the word says. Let's go to Genesis 12 and see how the language things says there. Now the Lord said to Abram, go out from your country, your relatives, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. God still hasn't showed him yet. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I'll make your name great. So remember, Babel was people wanting to make their own names great. God's saying, I'm going to make you a great nation. I will make your name great. What do you think, Juliana? Just because it's her birthday, she's like, I will. All right, so further down, so Abraham was 75 years old. Just some random information we need to know. It said, the Lord appeared to Abram. To your descendants, I will give you this land. So Abraham built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Sounds to me a little bit more than a dream. Maybe it was a vision. Maybe. Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Okay, well, maybe it's a vision. Fear not, Abram, I'm your shield, the one who will reward you in great abundance. And then Abraham was like, hey, dude, how are we going to do this? I'm childless. You're saying, like, you're going to make me into a great nation and I can't have any, like, I haven't got children. How's this going to work? Can understand the questions. And then it says, but look, vision, the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir. And then he says, actually, you're going to have kids and I'm going to make a plan. Then the Lord took him outside and said, gaze into the sky and count the stars. And then he said to him, so will your descendants be. Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord considered his response of faith as proof of genuine loyalty. In some of the verses, some of the translations says he counted it to him as righteousness. Genesis 18. Now this gets a little bit more, not freaky, but cooler. So the Lord again appeared to Abraham by the oaks. They were sitting kind of by his tent in the hot of the day. So he's basically taking a break because it was too hot. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing across from him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance to meet them, bowed low to the ground and said, my Lord. He recognized them. Why? Because he saw him before. He met him before. He had a conversation with him before. It's not something, he knew what to do. He bowed low. This was Yahweh. So he wants to wash their feet. You don't want to wash somebody's feet in a vision or in a dream, because it looks like they've been walking and their feet were dirty, and he's going to now do the custom of the day. This is embodiment of flesh, of spiritual beings that he's encountered, and now he's interacting physically with them. How do you say that, Louise? Well, guess what? They replied to him, and then they sat down because he ran around getting food. I mean, I wonder how long this must have taken, because it's not like he sent his wife to Woolworths or Checkers. He said, quickly, get some flour and go bake some bread. I don't think that was a quick exercise. So they must have sat and chatted and interacted with each other. And then they ate while he was standing near them under a tree. Abraham didn't eat with them. He watched them eat. They ate the food. Are you feeling a little wigged out? It's very unique, this language, in terms of an encounter with God. So, when I said God blunts his glory so that Abraham could process him in a humanistic way, that means that the God that Yahweh that Abraham encountered was incarnate in flesh, in the flesh. Who does that remind you of? So this is not only a vision, this is a visible manifestation, something real. They ate food, they interacted with him. So those 2 other guys, there were 3 of them in Genesis 18. 2 of them were angels, because it says in, I think, the next chapter 19, that those 2 guys go off to Sodom and Gomorrah and go deal with stuff there. There is no wings on them. Angels don't have wings. Sorry, that was for free. They were human, in a human form, embodiment, who walked. They didn't fly with their wings, because they didn't have wings. Cherubim have wings. Angels don't. Okay, sorry. So God appeared with him, not to him. He spoke with him. He interacted with him. They were face to face. That's cool. This is God, Yahweh. the uncreated one, all-powerful. And he is chosen in the Old Testament to embody himself in flesh, to relate to a human being. Now, this type of appearance becomes the norm when it comes to Abraham and his descendants. That's so cool. So let's go to the New Testament. John 1. We all know this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, if you notice in those, I think it's Genesis 15 and Genesis 18, it talks about then the Word appeared to Abraham. See the links? Okay, but the Word was God, so maybe it was Yahweh. And the Word became flesh and took up residence among us. Now, you think about those moments. That's exactly what this is saying. Took up residence among us. And we saw his glory. Glory is of the one and only from the Father, full of grace and truth. Okay. So we all can track with that, right? So let's go to what Jesus says. So we're still in John 8 now. So Jesus is chatting to some guys and they're giving him grief. And he's like, basically they're accusing Jesus of being a liar. So Jesus is saying, if I glorify myself, my glory is worthless. Remember, God says to Abraham, I'm going to make your name great. Jesus is also going, God's going to make my name great, even though he is part of the Trinity. How incredible is that? We don't need to make our names great. God will do it for us. The one who glorifies me is my Father, about whom you people say he is our God. Yet you do not know him. But I know him. If I was to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. Aish. So they're saying, you're lying, and he's going, well, if I said I didn't know my Father, I'm a liar like you guys. But I do know him, and I obey his teachings. Your father Abraham was overjoyed to see my day, and he saw it, and he was glad. So these guys reply and say, you're not yet 50 years old. Have you seen Abraham? So basically, they knew Jesus in the context of what he was saying, you know what, guys? I've met Abraham. I was there. So Jesus now, controversial as he loves to be, especially when it comes to religious mindsets and stuff, he goes, I tell you the solemn truth. Before Abraham came into existence, I am. So not only is he saying, I met with Abraham myself, he's saying, guys, before Abraham was there, I was there. Which he's saying, I am from Genesis and onwards. Jesus was telling them that he was there, embodied in flesh, incarnate, from the beginning, in the creation of the world. He wigged them out big time. So, Yahweh and the Word, Jesus and the gospel. So, we think that the gospel only occurs once Jesus died because he brought the good news. So, we've now discovered that Jesus was actually in the beginning. He was the one who encountered Abraham in flesh a few times. They had a meal together. Well, Abraham watched Jesus eat food. Jesus links all of this up in those sentences. Now, Galatians 3:8 is interesting because it says, Paul is saying that the gospel was preached to Abraham. So in that time period when Sarah was making bread, guess what? Abraham was having an encounter with the gospel because Jesus was preaching the gospel to him. Isn't that cool? So we reduce. See, God always had a plan, and his plan was already in place, working out, encountering people through Jesus in the Old Testament, not just in the New. The gospel existed in the Old Testament. It's always been good news, even in the Old Testament, even when there's rebellion, even when there's spiritual upheaval and disaster, the gospel is still there and always has existed. It's not a new thing. It's always been there. So what was plan A? Like, the Eden mandate is so much a part of this that we fully don't grasp this. You see, the plan is always to renew us back to a pathway back to God. It's a means to create and reclaim the nations. Because remember what I said, that the nations, it's always meant to be one big family, God's family, his earthly family. He never wanted, it was never his first idea or desire to set boundaries and separate humanity. So Jesus comes and he is now incorporating all of that. It's to reclaim the nations. It was always about the nations. Every part of every person on earth. So Israel became the elected. So this sounds quite exclusive, right? The elected, but they were meant to be the conduit for the disinherited or the non-elect. So God was saying, I'm going to give you over to your heart's desires, the world. I'm going to give you over to worship yourselves and other gods. But through Israel, you're going to get to know me. Why? How did that work out? Well, Israel was a kingdom of priests. They never were supposed to have that Levite priesthood. They were always supposed to be this kingdom of priests. And they were meant to live in a certain way in order to draw the attention of the cultures around them, and not to draw the attention to themselves, but draw the attention to who their God is. And that's the goal of signs and wonders for today. It's not to draw attention to us. So when Willem and the team go out and they preach the gospel and signs and wonders occur, is to point the attention back to God. To show the world that this God is real and he loves them and he sees them and he wants them. That's the goal. So Abraham and Israel's election was about access to truth. And it was about what they believe and how they show their belief, how they live it out. It's called believing loyalty. So we can all say that we believe in gravity. Bruce doesn't. Bruce lives out his belief. He's the one who jumps out an airplane. I, however, truly believe in gravity and will not jump out of an airplane. That's my believing loyalty. How does your life show your loyalty, your belief, your faith, your trust in God so that other people will go, there's something different about you? And that gets them to ask questions about why is your life different? And guess what? Then you get to speak about Jesus. That's the mission. So we, as the church, are this access to truth the world desperately needs. So that they get to know God, get to know about God, and then get to know him personally. What's interesting about the Israelites is we assume, maybe some of us, that they were all saved. But you see, free will still existed. Even though they had the access to truth in their election, they still had to take that and apply it in their own personal belief and choices in life. The same applies to us. They also had the choice to maintain that belief or that choice of belief every day. And that's what we do every day. That's why we talk about spiritual formation. It's maintaining your trust in God and that I keep choosing you. That's why we have things like communion. It's to realign ourselves, our allegiance to God. It's why we do baptism. It's a symbolism of where my allegiance lies. I choose Jesus. I turn away from Satan. This is the reason why God gave them the law. So we think the law is boring rules that make their lives dull. You know, they have to do all these things. But it was to help them live a good, flourishing life within community, and so that they would be different, so that people would see the difference and then ask them about their gods. It wasn't actually called the 10 Commandments. It was I think it was the way. It was like, it's not commandments if you translate it from Hebrews. You see, we have access to truth, and his name is Jesus. We don't need to earn God's favor. The gospel is never about performance. Abraham was living a happy life in Mesopotamia where he was quite settled. He didn't need to move, but God chose him. God put his favor on him, not because of anything he did, just because God chose him. There was no performance in that. And when it comes to us maintaining our belief, it's not a performance-based thing, because you can't outperform something you didn't have to perform for in the first place. You can't try and get rid of a favor that you never chose in the first place. It's just a response to him. You can't mess up something that is given to you freely. It's not like God's gonna, how does it work? He's not gonna say, well, Gary, you're my son, and then like, oh, you kicked the dog, so now you're not. It doesn't work like that. He knows that we mess up. Guess what? The Bible's full of that. He's not afraid, and I've said this before, of our sin. We are more afraid of our sin. He has made a way despite our sin because he wants us. So it doesn't matter if we mess up. If we don't do it perfectly, he's not about that. Because he always chose you. He still wants you. What does God want? So I'm going to play this next
video. If you've been around Christians, you've probably heard of the idea of having a personal relationship with God, which could mean different things in the Bible, like having God as a friend, or your father, or maybe your teacher.
But there's one particular way that the Bible talks about this relationship that you find all over. But strangely, we don't talk about it that much. And that's the idea of a partnership with God.
A partnership like working alongside someone to accomplish a goal together.
Right. And this is actually what you see at the beginning of the Bible. God creates this good world full of all of this potential. And then God appoints these unique creatures, humans, as his partners in bringing more and more goodness out of all that potential.
But the humans don't want to partner with God. They rebel and try to create a world on their own terms.
And so this broken partnership is the Bible's explanation for why we're stuck in a world of corruption and injustice and the tragedy of death.
It's not like there's just one or two humans who have bailed on this relationship. In the story of the Bible, everyone has abandoned the partnership with God.
So what God does is select a smaller group of people out of the many, and he makes a new partnership with them called a covenant. And in a covenant, God makes promises and then in exchange asks his partner to fulfill certain commitments. And the purpose of all of this is to somehow use this covenant relationship to renew his partnership with everybody else.
Now, there are actually 4 times in the Old Testament that we're told God initiates a covenant relationship with Noah, Abraham, the nation of Israel, and King David.
And it's through these that God is forming a covenant family into which all people will eventually be invited.
So let's see how these work. The first one is with Noah.
So in this story, God has just brought the flood to cleanse the world of humanity's corruption, and Noah and his family are the only ones left. And so God makes a covenant with Noah, saying, listen, I know that humans will continue to be evil, but despite that, I'm not going to destroy it like this again. Instead, the earth will be this reliable place for us to work together.
Great. So what does Noah have to do?
Nothing. And that's what's so interesting about this first covenant, is that God is promising to be faithful, even though he knows humans won't be.
The next time we see God make a covenant is with a man named Abraham. God chooses him, promises to bless him, give him a large family, lots of land where they can flourish.
And in return, God asks Abraham to trust him and train up his family to do what is right and just. And the whole reason for this covenant is God says that somehow he's going to bring his blessing to all families of the world through this one family.
So that's Abraham. The next time we see God make a covenant is when Abraham's family grows into the tribe of Israel.
And this covenant is with the whole tribe. God asks them to obey a set of laws, which are these guidelines for living well as a community of God's partners. And if they do this, then God promises to bless them and that they will become a people who then represent him to the rest of humanity.
That's the covenant with Israel. The last covenant is with King David.
Yeah, the tribe of Israel has become this large nation ruled by David. And God asked David and his descendants to partner with him by leading Israel in obeying the laws and doing what is right and just. And God promises that one day, one of David's sons will come and extend God's kingdom of peace and blessing over all the nations.
So those are the 4 covenants that God makes in order to restore his partnership with the whole world.
But here's what happens. Israel breaks the covenant. They worship other gods, they allow horrible injustice, and so they lose their land and are forced off into exile.
So it seems hopeless. But during this time, Israel's prophets talked about a day when God would restore these covenants in spite of Israel's failure, somehow.
Yeah, they called it the New Covenant. And this is actually what's so interesting about Jesus, is that he's introduced into this story as the one who fulfills all of these covenant relationships. We're told that he's from the family of Abraham, and so he will bring the blessings of that family to the whole world. We're told that he's the faithful Israelite who is able to truly obey the law. And we're told that he's the king from the line of David, and so he goes about extending God's kingdom of justice and peace to all.
And that's really remarkable for one guy.
Yeah, and what it highlights is perhaps the most surprising claim of all made about this man, that Jesus is no mere human, but rather God become human. And God did this in order to be that faithful covenant partner that we are all made to be, but have failed to be. And so through Jesus, God has opened up a way for anyone to be in a renewed partnership with him.
So Jesus calls people to follow him and become part of this new covenant family.
And despite their failures, Jesus is committed to making them into partners who are becoming more and more faithful.
The story of the Bible ends with a vision of a fully renewed world, full of goodness and peace.
And there's this renewed humanity there, partnering together with God to expand the goodness of his creation. And so the end of the Bible story is really a new beginning.
How incredible is that? We're in covenant partnership with Yahweh. God's promises and our very weak commitment, imperfect as it is. You see, the church is this kingdom of priests where we get to mediate between the world and our God. And it's through the way we live, what we do, and what we don't do that attracts people to God. And that's our mission. I was thinking that we sometimes are harder on ourselves than God is. And that sometimes that holds us back from, because we believe we need to be these perfect humans to show this perfect witness. And God doesn't really mind that we are not perfect. What he wants is our commitment. Close your eyes. So commitment doesn't mean like where you have to, because as we saw in the video, Jesus fills that gap of our lack of commitment, where we can't fill in those, we literally can't do those things. That's where Jesus fills the gap. He takes over that part of the covenant for us. And then his expectations of us is for us to just grow in our trust in him and grow in our imperfect commitment to him. But more importantly, he just wants us to be with him. And then he wants us to tell others about him because he wants to be with them as well. And you can't sell something that you are not. So you can't go to people and tell others about Jesus if you haven't been with him. And I just sensed today that when we were talking about the encounter that Abraham had, or those encounters that Abraham had with Yahweh, with Jesus embodied in the flesh. It's like some of us need to re-encounter him in a way that, because each time it got more and more detailed, each time it became, he appeared to him, and then he had a meal with him. It was a growing relationship. And some of you may have had an encounter with Jesus, but you long for more. And some of you have had more, but you long to have a meal with him. So wherever you're at with that, just ask Jesus not to come to you because he's already here, but that you can see him and that you can encounter him in a deeper way. Ask him to show you a little bit more about who he is. Maybe you need to just experience his love for you just one more time because you've started to believe the doubts and the lies that the enemy's been throwing at you about who you are. Maybe your purpose, your mission has become blurry and you just need him to show you a little bit more. Ask him. Maybe you just need to, the whole idea of hospitality in the ancient world was to have a meal with somebody. And see him face to face and allow him to see you. Ask Holy Spirit to fill you where you've been dry, where you're feeling like you've leaked a bit and life has happened. And maybe there's some of you here who've never encountered Jesus, and yet they're hearing this and they're like, oh, I really would like to meet this man, this God. He has done so much. Jesus, we thank you that you are always willing and you are able to meet us where we're at. Jesus, thank you that you didn't just pop into the scene in Matthew, in the New Testament, but you've always been there. You've always been a part of the story, God's redemptive plan. And we thank you for that. And Father God, I thank you that even though you are incredibly holy, that you are pure and undefiled, that you chose a way to come and meet with us in person through Jesus so that we can be with you. And we are grateful for that.